Pleased to welcome Parker McQueeney, who's a member of the Marxist Unity Group in the USA. And he's going to talk on how should the Democratic Socialists of America respond to the threat of a second Trump presidency. Parker's going to do an introduction, and there'll be plenty of time for comments and debate after that. Parker.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much to the PCC for having me. And I just want to extend a congratulations on 1,500 issues of the Weekly Worker from the Marxist Unity Group. That's a real accomplishment. It's a great paper. You know, it has its problems, but it's a great paper. So yeah, the upcoming election in DSA, I'm sure everyone here knows what DSA is, the Democratic Socialists of America. It's kind of ballooned since 2016 and when it got involved in the Bernie Sanders campaign. Somewhat of a stagnation since then. But anyway, its position in the 2024 election has been kind of ambiguous. And there are many different factions within it that have a different approach to the threat of Trump. And also the problem of, Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, now Kamala Harris in the Democratic Party. In 1968, Democratic National Convention saw a sitting president whose election was becoming untenable hand the reins over to his vice president. Outside protesters against an unpopular war were being famously brutalized. That election resulted in Hubert Humphrey's defeat at the hands of Richard Nixon, as everyone knows, who actually had sent Anna Chennault to South Vietnam to sabotage Lyndon Johnson's peace talks. That was only definitively proved in 2007. So there are some kind of eerie similarities to this year's presidential election, with fun assassination attempts and stuff like that. But when Democrats hold their convention in Chicago 2 weeks from now, big protests are also expected and planned. DSA is part of the planning. Though they may have had some wind knocked out of their sails with Biden gone. Hopefully demonstrators will not be treated to the same kind of hospitality from the Chicago Police Department. Actually, the current Chicago mayor, Brandon Johnson, is definitely not Tim Daly. It's kind of seen as a DSA ally in some respects. He came out of the Chicago Teachers Union, who's basically had leadership from the ISO. Or get involved in I don't remember the details. There's been some problems with him in his funding of the Chicago Police Department as well since then. So it's a good thing that DSA didn't back him from mayor, I think. Anyway, a lot of things. Either to launch a primary challenge to Biden or to mount an independent campaign. There are a couple of reasons for this. At the time, I was arguing that we should prepare to put forward Cornel West as a protest candidate. I think he's one of the best agitators and speakers that the US left has. He's good on the Ukraine war. He's good on Palestine. But the reaction from comrades was pretty much universally hostile. Firstly, before October 7th, the right wing of DSA had seen Biden as a kind of responsible coalition partner that asked the left to come in, making pretty decent appointments to the National Labor Relations Board. His picks have all, voted the right way and recognizing unions and stuff like that, which is kind of a new thing for Democratic presidents. Mounting a challenge would therefore not only be irresponsible, but unnecessary. In a way, the DSA right was correct to an extent that Biden, unlike Hillary Clinton in 2016, was willing to include the left in the Democratic Party Big Tent. The Biden people leaked in 2020 that they were considering Bernie Sanders for labor secretary. I think that was kind of seen as a message like, okay, we're going to treat you like adults. The second reason people were hostile to my proposal about, fielding a Cornell West for primary challenge was that in general, DSA has kind of taken an anti-political turn since the 2 defeats of Bernie Sanders. We'll get back to this. But in the 7 years since the organization has been kind of renewed, the politics, tactics, and strategy of its members has matured quite a bit. But that comes with some dogmas and some kind of what are seen as deadly sins that it's avoided at all costs in its electoral project. One of those is running in an unwinnable election. The logic goes that we have extremely limited resources, so we should kind of concentrate them where we can actually win. Here's an example. In New York City, which is home to DSA's largest chapter by far, Jabari Brisport, a member of DSA, ran for city council under the Green Party banner in 2020, I think. No, 2018. He lost. He only received 29% of the vote. Compared to what the Greens win in presidential elections, that's actually quite impressive. Especially because DSA city council districts are either the same size or bigger than New York State representative seats, either the Senate or the Assembly. In 2020, he ran again for a state Senate seat as a Democrat. He won with 52% of the vote. New York City DSA has built a decent bench in Albany, which is the capital of New York State. They have, I think, if I'm correct, they have 5 members in the state assembly and 4 in the state senate. Despite continuing to caucus with the Democrats, so they vote in their leadership elections and all that, they're elected as Democrats. They have been able to act as a coordinated bloc, voting together in state politics, and they're connected to the New York City leadership, albeit in a kind of bureaucratic way that the Marxist Unity Group people have been fighting through what's called the Socialists in Office Committee. The Socialists in Office Committee is made up of appointees from different working groups, health working group, women's working group, stuff like that, Green New Deal working group, as well as the citywide leadership. And when the committee takes a vote, which includes the electeds and the members of the committee, the electeds are meant to stay with that vote. So it's kind of a proto version of democratic centralism. Although, like I said, in a bureaucratized form, because the New York City leadership is a little bit insulated, to say the least. Anyway, most people in the US probably have no idea who the hell their state rep is. Jabari Brisport's campaign, I think, reportedly got over 1,000 people to volunteer, knock on doors and phone bank. That's a pretty good accomplishment. So how does that translate to the national or federal scale? DSA had endorsed 4 of its members in Congress, famously Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, Cori Bush of Missouri, and Jamal Bowman of New York. Frankly, the idea that these 4 were DSA representatives has always been a convenient fiction. Convenient for the electeds because they get the socialist brand to appeal to a very small minority, but a definitely existing base of radicals in the US, and convenient for DSA to appear to be a party capable of electing officials to Congress. Joining DSA takes all the effort of filling out an online form, donating $5. There are a few other DSA members in Congress that never received the DSA brand via the national endorsement, including one, Sri Thanadar, that wasn't even considered to be on the left of the Democratic Party. He caught some flack for walking Narendra Modi down the aisle when he was visiting Congress. He did leave DSA very publicly after October 7th, after some rally in New York. DSA co-sponsored that, someone gave a speech celebrating Hamas. There was a big kind of media hullabaloo. So DSA was always just one constituent part of the progressive left coalition that got those 4 elected. Rashida Tlaib's website lists both DSA and her home chapter of Metro Detroit DSA under her endorsement lists, alongside the Arab American Political Action Committee, various unions, etc. In reality, the important one there is not national DSA, but Detroit DSA. They are the ones hosting the phone banks and the canvases. DSA chapters issue their own endorsements, which then get forwarded to the national for the National Political Committee to consider. But as DSA doesn't have millions and millions of dollars for independent expenditure campaigns as a political action committee, so the national endorsement doesn't really come with anything other than a branding benefit. While the Congressional Democratic Socialists might often vote as a bloc, they don't do so under the advisement of a national DSA Socialist in Office Committee. They participate in Democratic caucus and leadership votes. So let's look at what it costs to make a winning run for Congress. In 2022, and keep in mind that's midterm and not a presidential election year, the median cost for an incumbent was $2.1 million. Freshmen raised $2.9 million. In districts that were a toss-up, the amount pretty much doubles to $5.3 million. And I'm not sure what the data is over here on how much money and campaign for a seat in Parliament costs, but I imagine it's much less than what the average British MP is raising. Over here, British MPs, they represent around 100,000 people each. In the lower house of Congress in the US, it's much higher, around 700,000 people. So that's a lot more people you need to knock on doors, phone bank for, etc. The barriers to representation are much higher in the US. And the campaigning is much longer. Mass membership organization can undercut some of those problems by having the numbers sufficient for volunteer canvases, but so far DSA has not been able to scale this up on its own. These costs also aren't necessarily relevant because we actually need to look at the races DSA is likely to run in. Every elected DSA representative is from a deeply Democratic district where the important part of the race was not the general election, but the Democratic primary. One might think that would make the cost significantly lower, and it did in certain respects, when AOC had her surprise victory. But she only raised $2 million in 2018. Her opponent raised $3.2 million. That's not too far off what the average spending is. DSA played a role in that race, but it was not hegemonic in the coalition that got her elected, although it totally benefited by the association massively afterwards. I mean, I think it grew from 30,000 people to 50 in the next couple of weeks because it offered the possibility of, socialists actually can win a congressional seat. Not too different from the average race in costs, but the fact that millions were spent in the primary was unique. So this kind of changed a little bit after October 7th. When Jamal Bowman won his race in 2020, he raised a pretty impressive $3 million. His opponent, which was an incumbent Democrat, raised about the same. This year's election, Bowman nearly doubled his fundraising to $5.6 million. But AIPAC spent $20 million on his election and knocked them out. I mean, that's $20 million. It's an insane amount. Even other middle of the road congressional Democrats were saying that's a little bit overkill. Bowman's district was also redrawn over the last year to now mostly be the wealthy suburban and disproportionately Jewish Westchester County. So he was vulnerable already, but AIPAC has been planning on spending $100 million in this year's election cycle, mostly on the opposing left-wing candidates, obviously. Their other main target, Cori Bush, who is another DSA member, she's kind of seen as the second best one next to Rashida Tlaib. You'd think maybe she would fare a little bit better. So her primary election was yesterday. I think this news is like 12 hours old or something. AIPAC spent $8.5 million. Other outside groups spent 10 million against her. Probably actually came from the same AIPAC donors, just under a different kind of shell name. She spent 3 million. She lost her election by 6,000 votes. So suddenly DSA is now down to 2 representatives in Congress as of yesterday. A couple DSA members have put together a spreadsheet in which a scorecard on all votes taken on Israel-Palestine is kind of listed. In first place, Rashida Tlaib, a Palestinian American representative from Detroit. Her score is 97%. Cori Bush was second with 96%. AOC was number 5 at 86%, and Bowman was 8th at 79%. And then beyond the top 9, there were no passing grades at all. Cori Bush is seen, like I said earlier, as some pretty reliable. She led a sit-in at Congress for, I forget, it had something to do with housing, but it was like a 48-hour sit-in outside the steps of Congress that did end up winning some paltry thing. So she was kind of seen by most DSA members as pretty militant, pretty decent on Palestine. So let's get back to the presidential election for a minute. Last summer's convention, DSA convention, a resolution prohibiting a Biden endorsement was not put on the agenda. There was a big fight about what to put on the agenda. It was very bureaucratic, and we in MUG, along with other groups on the DSA left, picked a handful of other things. I think the no Biden endorsement would have been a good one, but it was just a tactical choice of what we could include on the agenda fight. The Biden endorsement, the anti-Biden endorsement, resolution, it would have easily passed. DSA was never in danger of officially endorsing Biden, but the DSA right would prefer the ambiguity of kind of unofficial political support. We don't offer an official endorsement, but we campaign for him unofficially in the swing states, which is exactly what they did in 2020. Not under their DSA chapters, but individually. AOC, Bowman, and Bush all endorsed Biden like they were supposed to. Rashida Tlaib did not. Talk more about that later. The left in DSA was not happy about that endorsement, but the DSA right defended them. One reason that DSA was ill-prepared for this election was because the Volunteer National Political Committee had to face a severe budget crisis several months ago. And instead of focusing on political debate on how to relate to the election, they had their stipends cut, first of all, which meant they didn't really, they were all volunteer. They didn't have much time to actually lead a political organization of tens of thousands of people. But the main faction fight was where to keep the remaining budget and how many layoffs to put forward with the professional staff, because layoffs were really necessary. The DSA left was saying we need more layoffs so we can keep the organizing budget and keep the elected membership in control of the organization. The DSA right was saying prevent layoffs at all costs. These are people's jobs, blah, blah, blah. So that was a huge thing that was taking up all the attention of leadership and members. So eventually a solution was found with a certain number of layoffs, whatever. During this Marxist Unity Group, we put forward the slogan of no votes for genocide. Majority voted it down. So that's been our suggestion of how DSA should relate to the election, no votes for genocide. After the infamous Biden debate, DSA right actually totally jumped ship into the dropout Biden campaign and suddenly became the most militant and oppositional people in the US left, if only against the personal figure of Genocide Joe. Ironically, this put them at odds with AOC and Sanders. And this is kind of the amazing part. For the first time, prominent people on the DSA right were publicly criticizing AOC for defending Biden against the ongoing Capitol strike of the mega donors. They defended AOC and Bowman against critics when they voted to prohibit the massive rail strike, when they voted for funds to arm Ukraine, when they refused to vote against Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. But suddenly, when AOC and Sanders don't get behind the Kamala Harris palace coup, according to Seymour Hersh, that was orchestrated by Obama, they are finally worthy of some public criticism. AOC's political calculus actually totally makes sense from the logic of opportunism. She and Sanders had spent the last 4 years investing personal influence with Biden, culminating in executive action, creating 20,000 jobs for a civilian climate corps, which was a small part of her Green New Deal legislation. A new Democratic president getting the nomination in a situation where the left hadn't earned a spot at the table through an insurgent primary challenge that nearly won twice would only be a negative effect on their personal political influence on the administration. And that's the way that AOC, Bernie Sanders, and such see left strategy in the US is personal political influence within the top of the Democratic Party. So DSA officially echoed the call for Biden to drop out. Bread and Roses, the kind of post-Chapmanite Marxist caucus that's kind of right now considered the center in DSA. Since this summer's election of the NPC, they've kind of been consistently voting with the left, but in the last few weeks have been voting with the right. They joined forces with the two right-wing factions represented on the NPC, which are called Socialist Majority Caucus and Groundwork, to echo the call for Biden to drop out. The unstated reason the DSA right was so gung-ho on backing the Capitol strike and coup against Biden is that it offered a real chance for preventing Trump's election. But it's also, a kind of delusion that a Harris administration might be better on Palestine than Biden, because Biden is known to be kind of personally and ideologically a rather rabid Zionist. The DSA right, again, with confidence and supply from Bread and Roses, is already taking a victory lap over the appointment of Tim Walz as vice president. Tim Walz is seen as the more liberal option and known to not be a hardcore Zionist, unlike other, well, let me say that again. He's not known to be a hardcore Zionist like the other options in the final round of contenders. He hasn't really said anything about it. Yesterday, DSA tweeted, quote, Harris choosing Walz as a running mate has shown the world that DSA and our allies on the left are a force that cannot be ignored. Through collective action, DSA and the US left more broadly have made it clear that change is needed. DSA members organize in our workplaces and unions to realign the labor movement to support Palestinian liberation. End quote. It's possible that the large Arab American population in Michigan, which is a swing state, played a role in this calculus, but it's totally absurd for DSA to claim a victory for the vice presidential appointment in the bourgeois party. So prior to all of this, DSA salvaged a bit of its refusal to put forward a presidential candidate via its involvement in the uncommitted campaigns against Biden in Democratic primaries to protest the Biden administration's involvement in the Gaza genocide. It received around 1 million votes, and I think around 30 of the 3,900 delegates to the DNC. The uncommitted delegates are currently asking for a 5-minute speaking slot at the convention. Some have cast their vote for different names of civilians who have died in Gaza. Others have just gone ahead and voted for Kamala Harris in the virtual roll call hosted on Monday, which was initially designed to prevent a floor challenge to Biden, but they went through with it anyway. Had DSA instead put forward a candidate, we would have been able to cohere a much more serious campaign and rally the class forward rather than just act reactively, which we've been doing for the last however many months. DSA is not the only section of the working class, though, flailing around wildly in a sad attempt to exert class independence. I have to make an aside and talk about the rank and file strategy a little bit. So this is a big project of the kind of post-Chapmanite group, Bread and Roses, which is kind of broad and wide acceptance in DSA, the rank and file strategy. So industrialize into specific unions to help either form reform caucuses or join existing reform caucuses to overthrow the existing bureaucracy. It's been pretty successful in mostly in UAW, where they won 1 member, 1 vote against the kind of weird electoral college that union had, United Auto Workers. The reason DSA has such a presence in UAW is because UAW also represents grad school workers. So a lot of people were just kind of already there. it's a good thing. The new UAW president, Sean Fain, is kind of for US politics, he could be considered a radical. And then the other major one that Bread and Roses wanted people to industrialize into was the Teamsters Union, which represents about 1.3 million workers, both in the US and Canada. And there's not as many DSA people who went and joined the Teamsters as much as Bread and Roses would have liked. But DSA still did play a role in the election of Sean O'Brien, who used to be a lieutenant of Jimmy Hoffa, and Cosmonaut actually had published this whole history. We got so much crap for it. But then he switched and became part of the Reform Caucus. So he won the presidency, and all of a sudden, it was seen as a big win for the rank and file strategy and for DSA. In the last couple of weeks, a lot of DSA people have been changing their tune because he spoke at the Republican National Convention. His idea of class independence has been to play off the Democrats and Republicans against each other. He actually asked for a speaking slot at the DNC as well. He gave some kind of milquetoast social democratic demands at the RNC, and everyone kind of remained quiet. And then he said, and the left didn't want me to go here, blah, blah, blah. He praised some of these like Hungarian style national conservatives, and they all went, yay, yay. So, most DSA people are pretty pissed off at him for that. But, he's just kind of doing the opportunist version of independent class politics, which is triangulation between the Republicans and Democrats. So there is a small subset of people on the US left who are kind of defending him for that. The problem, of course, is no one in DSA who is putting forward the rank and file strategy is putting forward a pro-party version of the rank and file strategy, where we say, no, we need to actually align the trade union movement with a minimum program. Anyway, so with the presidential election, there are a couple left candidates running quixotic third-party presidential runs, as they always do. They reflect the absurd and the unorganized state of the US left. So Cornel West actually initially, he did decide to run for president, not with the backing of DSA, just on his own. I'd like to think that he read my email to him, which was maybe a mistake. He initially started running for a group called the People's Party before he realized they were basically kind of like Gallowayites, like weird kind of social conservative politics. He switched to the Green Party, but then he, for some reason, decided he didn't want to have to deal with the internal politics or visit the different states to primary. That was the official explanation he gave anyway, and jumped ship again for an independent run. So, I mean, it basically was discredited on an organizational level of what the hell is this guy doing? And then, so Jill Stein, initially, she was his campaign manager for the Green Party run. She's now running under the Greens. The Marseillais Party for Socialism and Liberation is also putting somebody forward that some DSA people talk about voting for, so on and so forth. 2016, Jill Stein received 1.1% of the vote for the Green Party, which is their second best ever result. In 2020, the Green candidate received 0.3%. DSA support for these are total non-starters because the third party protest vote, another one of these kind of deadly sins, it's seen as a totally unserious version of politics that will never achieve anything. I think this is sort of unfair, especially for an organization that routinely enlists the legacy of Eugene Debs. It's a bit ironic. There is value in an oppositional agitational campaign, although I agree the kind of organizational abilities of the third party left is rather unserious. But even this 2016 Sanders campaign was an oppositional agitational campaign, not meant to win, but to build a movement. That is before he realized he actually had a chance of winning the nomination. So DSA does not really have much of an orientation towards the 2024 election, besides its pressure campaigns, drop out Joe, that kind of thing. It's clear the right wing of the organization thinks it's imperative to offer political support to the Democrats in the face of the threat of Trump. But, I'll get to the topic that I'm supposed to be talking about now. What is the actual threat of Trump? Project 2025, you've probably heard of it. It's been a pretty successful campaigning boogeyman for the Democrats. The issue is that if Trump loses, Project 2025 just turns into Project 2029 and so on. It's a standard program put forward by the Heritage Foundation for every single election cycle. The main thing that the Democrats seem to be worried about in it is that it's clear that the next Republican administration will purge the federal bureaucracy and the circuit courts and so on of all Democrats and install party loyalists, likely to cause a chain reaction from Democrats to do the same if they have any, maybe they won't, they're not known to be necessarily militant in some cases, but that could cause, it's just a part of the continuing degeneration of the United States Constitution. Trump has vowed to end the war in Ukraine before he's even inaugurated. There's really no reason not to believe him. For all the hand-wringing from Democrats about dismantling NATO, Trump is actually just trying to enforce an agreement that NATO countries made with Obama to pay 3% of their GDP to NATO. It's just his advisors are taking a kind of realist approach that U.S. imperialism needs to turn its focus solely on China, and that it doesn't have the full spectrum dominance to be absolutely hegemonic in two theaters. That's probably true from the perspective of U.S. imperialism. Trump has also mentioned wanting to invade Mexico. That's also potentially related to the possibility of it as a site for Chinese investment. And then the other really awful thing is institute deportations on a massive scale, never seen before scale, I think is the language they use. Of course, there's the continuing problem of the Supreme Court, abortion rights, and so on. But this is these are all structural issues with the US Constitution. So the threat of Trump is really a long-term one and not an immediate threat. Democrats have said that the recent Supreme Court ruling granting presidents legal immunity turns them into kings. In fact, this was always the case, and executive power has bloated increasingly often, actually mostly under Democratic presidents since the 1930s, since FDR. The fact that it took a last-minute palace coup to replace Biden is kind of case in point. Any rational system invented after the Enlightenment would have been able to prevent Biden from becoming the nominee a long time ago. So if citizen Biden were looking to renew his driver's license, for example, he would have been unable to do so. But because the Democratic Party is the personal property of the president, they have a proprietary right to become the nominee for a second term. Only a personal decision can prevent him from seeking that. A standard Democratic congressman who ran against him in the primaries was ringing alarm bells about his age and his ability. He was completely sidelined by the media and the party apparatus. And then the other main part of Project 2025 is the vow to put government departments under the personal control of the monarch. It's just merely the logical tendency of this degeneration of the US Constitution. So DSA is preparing to co-sponsor the big march on the DNC in 2 weeks. We in MUG still think we should be armed with the No Votes for Genocide slogan. It's actually not so different than Representative Tlaib's approach to the election. She produced a video saying, Biden, we will remember this in November, talking about the Gaza war. And of course, her home state, Michigan, is an important swing state. The No Votes for Genocide slogan would have offered a consistent and principled line against the bourgeois parties, rather than the total reactive nonsense that's been going on. However, there is an action program for the 2024 coming out. It's called the For Our Rights Committee. It's kind of a stupid name. Established at last summer's convention. It's called the FORK program for short. It's been really slow to come out, but it's in its final stages. The final version has just been, voted on by the NPC. I'm going to read a little bit of it. If I can get it up. So it's called the Workers Deserve More program. There's a short preamble about the need for class independence, blah, blah, blah. There's 4 sections, 4 short sections. We fight for thriving working class communities, which is like stuff like Medicare for all and the war on drugs, mass incarceration, college for all, housing for all, blah, blah, blah. Economic demands, an economy for the working class, 32-hour work week, workers' right to form a union, invest in the National Labor Relations Board, tax the rich, Green New Deal. Then 3rd section is working class foreign policy, free Palestine, immediate and permanent ceasefire, end to military and economic aid and weapons sale, respect the decisions of the ICC, blah, blah, blah. And the U.S. war machine, greatly reduce the military budget, close overseas bases and bring troops home, end sanctions on Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, etc., and freedom of movement for migrants. And then the last section is working class democracy. So it's universal suffrage, full voting rights for all people with criminal convictions and non-citizens, established statehood for Washington, D.C., representative Congress, multi-party democracy through proportional representation election, expand the number of seats in the House of Representatives and end the Senate filibuster. No abolish the Senate, no democratic constitution, but it's getting there. Popular vote for president, so not end the imperial presidency, but replace the Electoral College with a national popular vote, reduce the power of Supreme Court, limit the court's power of judicial review. So this program should be seen as very representative of DSA as a whole. It was a really long process getting all the different factions to agree to it. But alongside the other stuff, it does call for replacing the 2-party system with multi-party democracy with proportional rep, and expanding the House of Reps. The program is extremely minimal. It's just an action program for this year. It'll be out of date very soon. But it does offer the basis for a fuller permanent revision of the program. Marxist Unity Group is in the process of writing our own full draft revision of the existing program. In reality, it will be nearly impossible for the U.S. socialist left to be an organized presence in national politics without achieving proportional representation. Even Rashida Tlaib, which is, she's seen as DSA's best rep, only views the local chapter as one of her constituent parts of her electoral coalition, not the party she's loyal to. She caucuses with the Democratic Party and votes in their leadership elections. She voted consistently for Biden's war in Ukraine. A real minimum program will need to include, combination of powers, the demand for a constituent assembly for a democratic republic, and a lot more. But if DSA agitates widely on the 4th program, it could become, the vanguard fighters for democracy in a movement for proportional representation, which is the formula of what is to be done famously. Continued degeneration of the U.S. Constitution means that other class elements will and actually are be looking for ways to get past the gridlock. The National Academy of Arts and Sciences is a bourgeois institution of eminent academics. It's put together a bipartisan commission on the practice of democratic citizenship, which is by bipartisan they of course mean Democrats and anti-Trump Republicans, which are basically the same thing. But they put this commission put together a kind of program calling for proportional representation and all sorts of other democratic reforms to kind of save the U.S. Constitution from itself. If we can get proportional representation, we can actually start to have a real political presence and grow beyond the impasse we're at now. What the U.S. left needs to do is to massively agitate around a modern day people's charter. It remains to be seen whether DSA will rise to the challenge. That's it.
For 5 minutes. We need to have a short break because I have to change the Zoom meeting. Sorry about that. I lose that and where it is.
So how is the movie Civil War? So is it pre-vote? No. Big screen, big. Read the shit. You're like a.
There are problems at home?
No, I have to change ID because we don't have access to that account, so it's not.
Okay.
We just need to go to another meeting. Thank you.
Are you around all week? I might try and.
So I'm leaving early Friday morning. Unfortunately not, but you know, tonight, tomorrow.
I'll try and pop you on the lunchtime with you tomorrow.
So I have cousins who live in London. I'm meeting them tomorrow, but.
I enjoyed the talk.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Sorry, this is a discussion. But, yeah.
Well, hopefully come back. I really like.
Yeah, not bad. Yeah.